Well, Donald Trump has never been able to convincingly express sympathy or sorrow for anyone other than himself. That is the mark of a sociopath, of course, the inability to feel sorry for someone. Many sociopaths are capable of saying, I'm sorry for your loss if someone in your family dies, but they are incapable of actually feeling sorry for your loss. They just know they're supposed to say those words, those well-rehearsed words. But the laziest and most mentally vacant president in history, Donald Trump, as he approaches 80 years old, no longer has the energy or the concentration to be able to continue to pretend that he feels sorry for even the members of the American military killed in service in his war. No president has ever gotten this wrong until Donald Trump. Acknowledging and honoring American military deaths is something every president got right. Most brought no particular eloquence to the moment, but they always found the words to acknowledge and honor military sacrifice until Donald Trump. Last night at 9:17 p.m., with the cameras rolling, Donald Trump's mind and feelings appeared to be in apparent sociopathic lockdown, possibly, when he was asked about the 6 Air Force personnel on a refueling plane that crashed in Donald Trump's new war zone. Watch what Donald Trump says and does in a moment that so obviously calls for sympathy and admiration and honor, things Donald Trump apparently just cannot feel.
Do you have a comment on the 6 service members?
Who else?
Nothing. Not a word. Just an immediate turn away. Who else? Who else has a question that's not about the war dead? 6 American Air Force personnel lose their lives in a refueling accident in Donald Trump's war, and Donald Trump doesn't have a word to say about them and their sacrifice and their families' suffering. Air Force Sergeant Tyler Simmons, age 28, of Columbus, Ohio, was on the plane that went down. Here's what Tyler Simmons' cousin and grandmother said to a local NBC affiliate yesterday afternoon, several hours before Donald Trump could not think of a word to say about the sacrifice Sergeant Simmons made and the suffering of his family.
This could have been prevented. We didn't need to be in this war. You know, this is uncalled for. And this is what we get.
Families are suffering right now. Not only our family, but there are other families that's lost loved ones. And just to create a war because you want to create a war, it's not right. It is not right.
The 5 others whose deaths Donald Trump refused to even acknowledge or comment on are Major John Klinner, 33, of Auburn, Alabama; Captain Ariana Savino, 31, of Covington, Washington; Sergeant Ashley Pruitt, 34, of Bardstown, Kentucky. The other 3 on that plane were all from Ohio, serving in the Ohio Air National Guard. They were Sergeant Tyler Simmons, Captain Seth Koval, 38 years old, of Stoutsville, Ohio, and Captain Curtis Angst, 30, of Wilmington, Ohio. The dignified transfer will take place Wednesday and be closed to the press at the request of the families. That doesn't mean Donald Trump won't try to find some way to exploit the dignified transfer, as he did exploit the first dignified transfer that occurred during his war. Donald Trump disgraced himself as the only president in American history who has tried, or would even consider trying, to raise money over the bodies of the war dead in a war that he started. Donald Trump has sent out a fundraising email using a photograph of Donald Trump wearing a ridiculous and disrespectful hat at that dignified transfer. Any other president would be immediately rebuked by unanimous votes of the House and the Senate on a resolution condemning the president for dishonorable behavior, at a minimum for doing something like this. MS Now reports Donald Trump's fundraising email with the photograph exploiting the war dead tells the victims of that email solicitation, quote, as a national security briefing member, you'll receive my private national security briefings, unfiltered updates on the threats facing America, the straight truth on border invasions, foreign adversaries, deep state sabotage, and every danger the fake news hides. You'll get the inside scoop direct from me, President Trump. And imagine being stupid enough to receive that email and send in that money, believing you were going to get something truthful from Donald Trump. Donald Trump continues to deepen his pathological lying about his war, saying today he has spoken to a former president, a Democrat, who supports his war. That is, of course, an obvious lie. Each of the former living Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, issued statements saying that no, none of them talked to Donald Trump about his war. That kind of public hallucination by a president is more than enough to invoke a 25th Amendment procedure based on the mental health grounds that the president is incapable of serving and remove the president from his duties, especially in the middle of a war started by that same incompetent president who cannot explain why the war started or what will be necessary to end the war. Donald Trump gave the stupidest answer in the history of the question, when will the war be over?
I don't think it's going to be long. When it's over, this is going to bounce right back so fast.
When are you going to know when it's over?
When I feel it.
Okay.
I feel it in my bones.
Asking Donald Trump questions like this is a meaningless exercise. Donald Trump's answers have absolutely no meaning. Donald Trump's answers conflict with Donald Trump's answers all the time. And so it's just a game played by reporters who are allowed to ask Donald Trump questions, but no one can pretend to have learned something or been illuminated by a Donald Trump answer. That never happens. The question and answer format is now just another way of publicly tracking Donald Trump's incoherence. Donald Trump has said that the Iranian leadership is eager to make a deal with him, like the Venezuelan regime did, to stop the war. But with Donald Trump in the White House, we have reached the first time in history where Iran's foreign minister might have more credibility, might have more credibility than the President of the United States.
No, we never asked for a ceasefire, and we have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes.
Donald Trump has gone from saying the United States military doesn't need anyone's help in this war to desperately begging any and all foreign countries to help him in his war. Not surprisingly, no other country has yet to step into Donald Trump's war zone. Donald Trump has asked them to send ships to the Strait of Hormuz, which remains blocked with 20% of the world's oil supply stuck, and to increase the world's oil supply during this oil crisis created by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has turned to two countries to invite them, issue friendly invitations to invite them to participate fully in the world oil market to increase the oil supply. The first of those countries is Russia, the country that is so far the biggest winner in Donald Trump's war. If Vladimir Putin could have asked one favor from Donald Trump, it might have been, please go to war with Iran and block the Strait of Hormuz. And so American sanctions have been harming the Russian oil trade during the Ukraine war. They are now being lifted by Donald Trump. And the other country Donald Trump has invited back into the world oil market with his approval is Iran. That's right, Iran. The New York Times report, Iran has allowed some tankers to pass through the strait, including ones carrying oil to China and India, U.S. officials said, and that is with Donald Trump's approval. The most abused word of the Trump era is treason. The legal definition of treason seems to escape most people who use the word, especially Donald Trump, who uses it more than anyone else. Donald Trump is now calling accurate reporting on his war treason. That's his word for it. No matter how many times Donald Trump uses the word, no one has to fear a treason conviction because there hasn't been one since World War II. The reason we have not had a treason conviction since World War II is the Supreme Court has held that a necessary precondition for the crime of treason is a declaration of war. Because the Constitution defines treason as giving aid and comfort to our enemies, the word enemy carries legal meaning, and the only way to qualify as an enemy in a treason case is for that enemy to be named in writing in a declaration of war, which the United States of America has not passed since World War II. And yes, it's outrageous and further signs of Donald Trump teetering on the brink of dementia. But from Donald Trump, the word treason is just another empty threat, just like every threat issued by his FCC chair, who issues his threats on social media, pretending to have powers that he doesn't have. Brendan Carr is the only deranged FCC chair in American history, the only one who imagines he has powers that don't exist when he threatens to revoke licenses of broadcast networks if their reporting on Donald Trump's war is accurate. The FCC chair has no such power, no matter what the networks do. He is a clown playing to an audience of one who is an ignoramus. And so accurate television reporting about Donald Trump's war will continue, and Donald Trump will continue to describe reporting on his war dead as treason. And when he's asked about it, he will immediately turn away from that question and ask the White House press corps, who else? And that next compliant reporter will do what they always reliably do for Donald Trump in the White House press corps. They will change the subject. And tonight the question remains, who else? Who else is going to die waiting for Donald Trump to feel it in his bones that it's time to end his war? Who else is going to die and have their deaths ignored by the president who sent them into war? The president who feels nothing. Who else? After this break, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Adam Smith, will join us. Today, CNBC is reporting that Donald Trump's war has triggered the largest oil supply disruption in history, with crude prices surging about 40% since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. Donald Trump said last week that the United States would provide military escorts and war insurance, in effect, to oil tankers facing potential missile strikes and mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Retired Navy Admiral William McRaven, who oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, told the New York Times it could take more than a month to get ships and other military equipment to the area to demine the strait. Even then, many boats may not want to take the risk of navigating the waterway. Joining us now is Congressman Adam Smith of the state of Washington. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. And Congressman, I know that your state suffered one of the losses in this last Air Force accident. Captain Ariana Savino is from Covington, Washington. I noted that when I was reading about her today.
Yeah, no, it's just close to my district down in South King County. And yes, one of 13 service members who have lost their lives. Now estimates are there are over 200 casualties. So the cost of this war is very clear. What we are struggling with is the benefit and where this will ultimately lead us to once Donald Trump, as he has famously said, feels it in his bones to stop the war. That lack of a strategic plan is deeply troubling in light of the very, very human costs that we have seen.
Can you comment on Donald Trump's refusal to comment on the death of Captain Savino or anyone else on that plane?
Well, one of the more troubling aspects of Donald Trump, and believe me, there are many, he doesn't think in terms of consequences. You see this in the way he acts. He does what he does and then just continues. There's no focus on what are the consequences of my actions. That's a huge problem, well, I think for any human being, but certainly for someone with the power and responsibility of the president of the United States. I mean, I'm just a member of Congress, but I think all the time about the votes I take. I think about what I say. I think about the policies that I advocate for and how are they going to impact people. Now, I don't let that paralyze me or stop me from acting, but it's part of the responsibility of the job. You've seen how Trump talks. He doesn't give a second thought to it, and he doesn't want to be bothered by it. He pretends that it's not there. And certainly that's troubling on a human level to see a leader setting that example for the people of this country. But from a policy perspective, it's a major problem because he's not thinking through the cost benefit of the policies he's implementing. He's not thinking through the consequences. If you can't face the responsibility of your actions and accept them, then you're making decisions that are not based on reality.
We have more video evidence, actually, of the way Donald Trump thinks about death. And this is today. He was talking about a Republican member of the House who had a grave illness, who had apparently the possibility of looming death, but recovered from surgery and is fine. And let's just listen to the way Donald Trump talked about that.
Death is very bad when you're the speaker and you have a majority of 2 or 3.
That was it. Donald Trump then said, again, death is bad. And he said, I needed his vote. That's what was important to Donald Trump about this House member, Republican House member, whose life was threatened but then recovered after surgery. That's the person who's running this war. Death is bad, not sad. It's just bad because it's some kind of political problem for him.
Yeah, I mean, that cruel indifference to humanity, I mean, it bleeds us into all different policies. I mean, gosh, you see it in the ICE enforcement, 2 people killed, many others, the use of violence by ICE escalating and complete indifference from people. They lie about what happened. Look, humanity is part of being an effective leader. And I think it's very, very clear that President Trump doesn't have that. I mean, going all the way back to his famous quote about how people who join the military are suckers and losers. That lack of values, that lack of humanity, again, it is a disgusting example for all of us trying to get along with each other. But it also pushes forward policies that are indifferent to human suffering. And that should be at least part of the equation and an appreciation for what it means as a human being, not how it impacts your own personal calculus.
If the Democrats win the House of Representatives, as they appear on track to do in this election, you'd become chairman of the Armed Services Committee. If that were today, what would be different going forward with Donald Trump's war?
Yeah, there'd be a lot more oversight, and there would be certainly a focus on the appropriations process. But a huge part of this is holding them accountable. I mean, it is remarkable that, this war has been going on for 2.5 weeks now. There has been no public hearings. There has been no effort by this Congress led by the Republicans to have the administration come in and explain itself, explain how they got into it and where they're going. And that lack of accountability leads to this sort of, no consequences approach. That is a big part of what Congress is supposed to do, is exercise that oversight, hold the administration accountable, make them explain themselves. And part of that is to make them sort of actually implement a policy that can work. Now, I don't want to overstate this. The president of the United States has an enormous amount of power. He has the power to ignore Congress, as his president certainly does, but at least shining a light on it and using our power as a legislative branch to exercise oversight, it can help and it can move us in a different direction. And I hope we get that opportunity.
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Coming up, federal judges are in a position to be Donald Trump's worst nightmare there these days, and Donald Trump knows it, which is why Donald Trump is attacking them, including members of the Supreme Court who he appointed. That's next with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Last night, Donald Trump issued one of his longest social media posts ever, and it was not about the war that he started. It was not a presidential tribute to the American war dead in his war. It was about federal judges, including the United States Supreme Court. Donald Trump expressed his incoherent outrage at the Supreme Court for agreeing with the Constitution that Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional. Donald Trump also focused his attack on a federal district court judge, James Boasberg, who blocked the Trump Justice Department's subpoenas targeting Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. In Judge Boasberg's scathing 27-page decision, the judge wrote, "The words and actions of the president and others in the executive branch make it clear that the United States Attorney's Office issued the subpoenas with the dominant, if not sole intent to harass and intimidate the Federal Reserve and Chair Jerome Powell in order to allow the president to dictate the Federal Reserve's setting of monetary policy. A mountain of evidence suggests that the government served these subpoenas on the board to pressure its chair into voting for lower interest rates or resigning. On the other side of the scale, the government has produced essentially zero evidence to suspect Chair Powell of a crime. Indeed, its justifications are so thin and unsubstantiated that the court can only conclude that they are pretextual. The court therefore finds that the subpoenas were issued for an improper purpose and will quash them." Donald Trump's incompetent U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., responded to Judge Boasberg's decision this way.
"I'll deal with the devil. I'll take a case from the devil if you can give me information that will lead me to possibly find a crime. It doesn't matter where a case comes from. It doesn't matter. I can have a suspicion. I can read the newspaper. I can just want to make sure he didn't commit a crime."
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, I'm trying to make sense of what I just heard, but I think she's saying Donald Trump is the devil. Do I have that right?
I kind of got lost in that too, Lawrence. Didn't sound very prosecutorial, though.
So this decision by the judge is something I've never seen before. A judge saying absolutely no, these subpoenas you're issuing in this criminal investigation are essentially fraudulent.
Yeah, I mean, when you are a prosecutor, I was our attorney general in Rhode Island and the U.S. attorney there, so I've been in that seat. And particularly when you're going after a public official or a public agency, you don't get to do that unless you have something called predication. And what Judge Boasberg basically said is, there's no evidence here whatsoever. There's nothing to justify doing this. And when there's nothing to justify doing this, then the implication is very strong that there's an ulterior motive, that the justice system is being abused to accomplish a political purpose. And stopping that is what judges are for. And of course, Donald Trump teed up Judge Boasberg because all of his ranting and all of his raving about Jerome Powell is out there on the internet for the judges and everybody else to see. So all the pieces were there for the judge to make what actually was a very sober, well-written, and eminently justified decision.
And we saw with Jeanine Pirro there, this notion that she thinks that as a federal prosecutor, she can bring cases to prove that someone didn't commit a crime. That's a reason to conduct an investigation, to investigate the no crime.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense at all. It's inconsistent with longstanding Department of Justice practice, and that longstanding Department of Justice practice applies to all Americans. But judges watch with particular scrutiny when the power of the government is brought to bear against public figures in the political arena, like Jerome Powell and the Fed, because it's so likely in those cases that there is a improper political motive. And here you've got Trump confessing his improper political motive, and you've got a shoddy U.S. attorney's office run by an incompetent U.S. attorney that isn't bothering to put enough evidence together to let Boasberg say, well, you know, this could be bad, but at least there's some evidence here. So yes, you have predication and you can proceed. So the whole thing fell apart. But Boasberg did the job the way he should, and that's what drives MAGA crazy. They run across judges who do the job the way they should, and they don't like the result. And so you get into the sort of crazy ranting and raving of the president against Judge Boasberg, which is really, really out of line. And I hope that the Chief Justice steps up a little bit more his efforts to protect the district judges, because this assault on Boasberg is part of a continuing pattern. And I think the district judges are starting to get a little bit fed up that they're not getting more cover, more protection, more seriousness out of the Chief Justice.
And what can be done to protect the judges when they get individually named like this? I mean, most people don't know the names of any of these judges who aren't on the Supreme Court.
Well, the first thing you have to understand is there's kind of a system at work here in which the MAGA individual, whether it's Trump or Elon Musk or Laura Loomer or whomever, launches invective against a particular judge. And then they put it out on the internet, very often on X, where there is a curated band of people who I call the flying monkeys, just waiting to be irate about something. And when they get fed this provocation, they then go off and they're the ones who send the death threats and the threats against families and the really gruesome threats that judges are now experiencing like never before. And the problem here is that we cannot get the Marshal Service, which is supposed to defend these judges, to confirm that it will investigate behind the guy who got revved up and uttered the threat, to look at whether or not there's any method, any conspiracy, any enterprise, any orchestration of those threats. This is like investigative technique 101. And when they say that's like super easy question. Will you do that? Yeah, of course, that's what we do. And instead, they won't give us that answer. So these judges are actually quite exposed if the Marshal Service and the MAGA Department of Justice is not looking behind the utterer of the threat to look at these patterns and these seeming orchestrations of threats. And of course, that is the purpose. Trump wants to put up the heat on these judges, and he knows he's got his flying monkeys out there. So this whole thing is really quite deliberate, and that's unusual.
So the judges are depending on their security from the U.S. Marshals who work for Donald Trump in the organizational chart.
Yeah, work for Pam Bondi, to be more exact. So the whole MAGA DOJ, the weaponized MAGA DOJ, is who's in charge. And, you know, when you have a system like this, it's really, really important that the laws be properly enforced. And we have laws about conspiracy. We have laws about racketeering enterprises. We have laws about soliciting or orchestrating threats. All of that is in the law. And when the U.S. Marshal Service and the Department of Justice won't say, yes, we will investigate those things if there's evidence, that is a really dangerous sign, because it's a huge, huge tell, Lawrence. And judges in particular need to be paying attention to that failure on the part of the men and women who are protecting them. Actually, it's probably not those men and women who are at fault. It's the upper MAGA DOJ types who've been, for some reason, not able to let the Marshal Service proceed.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And coming up, Donald Trump is now facing an order from a federal judge to refund his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs, while Donald Trump continues to lie about who paid those tariffs. Neil Katyal, the lawyer who won the tariff case, the Trump tariff case in the United States Supreme Court, will join us next. He began as what they call a village justice in Cooperstown, New York, home of the Baseball Hall of Fame and a population of about 2,000 people. And he is now one of Donald Trump's worst nightmares. Richard Eaton went from village justice to working as a legislative director and other positions in the United States Senate staff to being appointed a federal judge in 1999 by President Bill Clinton at the suggestion and recommendation of New York senior senator then Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Judge Eaton's appointment to the federal bench was an appointment to the most obscure federal court, one that many lawyers don't even know exists. It is located in America's center of international commerce, New York City, and occupies its own building in the cluster of federal and state courthouses around Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. The United States Court of International Trade is the court that issued a unanimous opinion finding Donald Trump's tariffs unconstitutional and illegal, an opinion that was upheld by the United States Supreme Court, who left it to the Court of International Trade to decide how to issue refunds of all of the tariff money illegally collected by Donald Trump. A refund case for one company landed on Judge Richard Eaton's docket at the Court of International Trade, and he wasted no time in ordering full refunds, not just for that one company, but for the other American companies that are owed refunds. Last night, Donald Trump told this lie in a deranged social media post at 10:45 p.m. The decision that mattered most to me was tariffs. The court knew where I stood, how badly I wanted this victory for our country, and instead decided to potentially give away trillions of dollars to countries and companies who have been taking advantage of the United States for decades. Not one country will get 1 penny of refund of Donald Trump's illegal tariffs because 100% of the revenue collected by the United States Treasury for Donald Trump's illegal tariffs was paid in the United States and only in the United States in American dollars by the American companies that purchased tariffed goods. And now, Judge Eaton has ordered the Trump Treasury to deliver those refunds to the Americans who paid them. After Donald Trump's Justice Department lawyers complained to Judge Eaton that they didn't know how to issue the refunds, Judge Eaton said in court, Customs knows how to do this. They do it every day. They liquidate entries and make refunds. Judge Eaton gave Donald Trump 45 days to set up an automated system to process tariff refunds, saying, quote, these duties must now be refunded with interest, and the clock is ticking. Further interest is accumulating every day, with approximately $650 million accruing per month. If the entries are not liquidated before the end of the year, it is further estimated that $10 billion of interest will have accrued. American taxpayers will bear this financial burden. The Wall Street Journal reports, quote, Eaton has moved at a speed not seen at the trade court, where cases typically flow at a relaxed pace. Judge Eaton, like all of the judges in the Court of International Trade, is an expert on the payments and refunding of tariffs, something the Court of International Trade has been presiding over for 100 years. In a hearing on the case, Judge Eaton said, I believe that there will be no chaos associated with the provision of these refunds and that it will not result in a mess. Joining us now is Neil Katyal, former acting U.S. Solicitor General, who argued and won the Trump tariff case before the United States Supreme Court. Neil, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'm finding it so refreshing to see this matter finally in front of a judge who does nothing but this, a judge who actually is an expert in this arena.
Yeah, so Lawrence, thank you for having me on. And, the case is pending, so I want to be very circumspect about what's going on there. But look, I think the bottom line we've always said is the government under Donald Trump's authorization collected billions of dollars in wrong taxes. And that's about as serious a sin as exists against our taxpayers. And we said to them, don't do this. Don't do this because you're going to have to give the money back plus interest. They did it anyway. And now here's where we are: $10 billion a year in interest on these false tariffs. This is not, we could do so much more good with $10 billion than be paying interest for tariffs that we wrongfully collected.
So when the Court of International Trade first ruled against the Trump tariffs, finding them unconstitutional, when the Trump team appealed that case, they insisted in their appeal that there was no need to allow refunds at that stage of the case, because they would happily, it was part of their appeal that they would happily refund this money if the case went against them. Now they're fighting the refund process.
Lawrence, I'm so glad you pointed that out. This is our case that was first in the Court of International Trade, where we won unanimously. Then we won it in the Federal Court of Appeals, the Specialized Trade Court of Appeals, and then we won it in the Supreme Court. And you're absolutely right. What the Trump administration told the court after we won, the lower courts, was, hey, you don't have to give the money back right now, because we'll give the money back later if the Supreme Court rules against us. We'll guarantee that, and we'll give it back with interest. And so those are representations they made to the court in our case before this very court, the Court of International Trade. And so it's very hard for them to walk it back, which is why I think you see the judge saying, look, this is a really straightforward situation. You collected a pile of money illegally. You got to give it back. And there's an established process for doing so. Customs does it all the time.
And apparently the biggest importers, they build in to their tariff payment basically a request for a refund in case they overpay. It's a standard filing procedure that they do. So one report indicates that of the 330,000 importers who paid these tariffs, 21,000 registered for a possible refund when they were paying them. So they will be, that 21,000 apparently will be the easiest, most automatic refunds. But what Judge Eaton seems to be trying to do is make it easy for everyone else.
That's exactly right. And, you know, in this case, I was so pleased to represent the Liberty Justice Center, a think tank which represented small businesses. And what we said all along was, you know, these tariffs, big companies sometimes can deal with them. It's still a cost to them and very difficult. But they have sophisticated counsel, Lawrence, like you say, who warn the customs to put when they're collecting the tariffs, hey, we're demanding a refund if the Supreme Court case comes out our way. But the small businesses of this country don't necessarily have those resources. And it's there where you really felt the impact of Donald Trump's unilateral tariffs. And, you know, that's what it took so much courage for these small businesses to stand up and say to the Trump administration, you can't do this, it's illegal. But that's what they did, and they won. And now the government is trying to say, oh, no, you won in the Supreme Court in a 6-3 historic decision, but you don't get the money back. And that's just contrary, not just to what they said in court, it's contrary to the entire spirit of the American government and the American way.
And so many millions of taxpayers every year overpay, some deliberately overpay their taxes on withholding taxes during the year. And when they file their tax returns, they get a refund from the United States Treasury, and it's automatic. And oh, by the way, the total amount of money is way bigger than the amount that has to be refunded on the tariffs.
100%. This is not something the government can't do. They've done it. You know, the harbor maintenance tax was invalidated a few years ago with billions of dollars in refunds. So it's certainly possible to do and to do quickly. And I think that's what you're hearing from the established legal community. This is not about politics. This is just about the fact that the government collected a whole bunch of money unlawfully, and we should return it for those who rightfully pay, who it's rightfully owed to.
And to Donald Trump's point, after you won the case, and he was so shocked that the United States Supreme Court did not get in there and start writing a prescription of how to do refunds, something that no one on the court has any idea how to do. Instead, they knew quite well that they were sending it back to the Court of International Trade, where they do know how to do this.
Right, and that's exactly what we asked for, and that's what we got. And it's frankly impossible for me to follow a lot of the president's comments on this case. Sometimes he says it's the worst ruling ever. Other times it says he can tariff even more than he's tariffed before he claims that is what the opinion says. There's obviously nothing like that in the opinion. He's not reading the same opinion that the rest of the world is. I think the Supreme Court was as clear as day that Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal and unconstitutional, and the money, you know, now has to go back to those who wrongfully paid these tariffs.
Neil Katyal, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Neil Katyal, the attorney who beat Donald Trump in the United States Supreme Court, gets tonight's last word.